Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Teacher's Point of View. Got a really special guest here today. He's a head teacher in a primary school just in the rural parts of England, Mr. Matt Jessop, everybody. Matt, can you kind of introduce yourself and kind of who you are and the journey you've been on in education? That'd be a great start.
Yeah, I'm a head teacher of a small school up in Cumbria, about 100 children all in all, just outside the Lake District National Park. We are a national sports school and we're a Google reference school.
What's a Google reference school?
A school that's been using Google Education Suite mainly and is sufficiently competent staff and children to actually share expertise with other schools and support other schools using it.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, you know why I've got you on here today, Matt. I mean, ultimately, we've obviously want to talk about the kind of where education is and kind of the direction it needs to go, right? And look, honestly, I feel like every year there's millions of children that get let down by the system and kind of. I feel like we should be incorporating different strategies to try and make sure that it's inclusive for all children and actually help every child, give every child a possibility to succeed, not just the ones that do really well in exams, you know? I mean, where do you think like the kind of issues in education lie at the moment?
It's a long list, I think, isn't it? I think the biggest issues, the two biggest ones I would highlight would be that the people in charge of education, so the Secretary of State for Gavin and his buddies, have no clue about what they're doing, have no clear lines of communication with on the ground education members. So I think there's a distinct problem that educators are not in control of education. And the second one, it will be funding, in that schools are not sufficiently funded enough. It's all very well and good to say there's funding rises coming this next financial year, and there is, but those fund rises are only getting us back to where we were in 2010. So it's not an increase in funds, it's just slowly catching up to where it should be.
Yeah, I mean where it should have been, not where it should be now, right? I mean it's crazy. I think you raise a really good point in terms of obviously sort of having someone like Gavin Williamson in power. Ultimately, he doesn't know anything about education, and I spoke to a buddy of mine who used to work in the Treasury, so he's a macroeconomist, and he kind of gave me a broad perspective of kind of what needs to be done. The problem is, right, we vote for a party, we vote for whether it be Labour or Conservative, and what we don't ever vote for is an education secretary, you know, and I think fundamentally when we vote for a party, the package kind of comes with it, and I think it's always difficult because as educators, you don't get the opportunity to vote who's in power for education in some respects. I mean, like what can we do to change the dynamics of the like sort of the who's in power?
I mean, in terms of who's in power of education, you mean who's in charge of education? Well, I mean, it shouldn't be a political issue, should it really? It shouldn't be a political beliefs and political will that is running education. It should be a cross-party approach with a huge voice of educators in there as well. And until that actually happens, we're going to have the problem, election on election, that actually somebody's going to come in with a different take on education, and things are going to change again. And that could be every 4 years. It could be even more often than that. And until we actually get a cross-party agreement that they are going to listen to educators more and give educators a greater control in education, whether it's national curriculum, testing, whatever it is, you're not going to be able to put a long-term plan into place. And schools are currently working on, we don't know what's happening in the next financial year for us. A school needs a 5 to 10 year plan to actually plan long-term for the education of the children, and the education secretary needs to be a long-term appointment of somebody that actually knows what they're doing. Now, I'm sure Gavin Williamson has lots of skills and knowledge in other areas, but he certainly hasn't got any in the field of education.
I mean, you know what? That's so frustrating, isn't it? Because every year they allocate a budget to education, right? And like, from what I understand, like speaking to my mate in the Treasury, or he used to work in the Treasury, it's very much dependent on the secretary of that department to be able to, like, kind of, it depends on their charisma of how much of of a budget they'll get for education, right? So, I mean, it's figures that are pulled out of the thin air in some respects, because how does he, like someone like Gavin Williamson, know where funding should go in and where it should be allocated in education? I mean, you're just getting a budget and then kind of just throwing it at education without actually figuring out what the right perspective is and what really where we need to invest to actually improve education, you know?
Yeah, I mean, the figures are there if you want them, aren't they? There's clear figures about what's needed to restore all school buildings to a suitable standard. We know there's thousands of schools across the country that are struggling with the actual building infrastructure, the quality of the building and things. So once the Building Schools for the Future programme was scrapped, which was billions and billions of pounds, it all went downhill from there. And until that comes back and schools are given that funding, just the basic school building infrastructure is never going to be good enough across the whole of the education system. So the figures are definitely there for that. The figures are there for what schools need to invest in education technology and things like that. It's all there. But I think you've hit the nail on the head there with the fact that we're very dependent on the Education Secretary being able to present a convincing argument when he has his budget meetings with the Treasury and things about why education should be given preference over other areas. And I accept there's a lot of pressures on the government at the moment. But if schools are reliant on the charisma of Gavin Williamson, then we're stuffed.
It's
not
true.
Funny though, is it really?
No, it's laughable though, isn't it? Because it is laughable, because it's like you can just see the lack of actual expertise that Gavin has had over the last 10 to 12 months in terms of some of the decisions he's made, the U-turns, the suing of Greenwich Council for doing right by their schools and their children and their families. You know, I mean, the kind of telling Ofsted about like to parents, like parents complain to Ofsted if happy. I mean,
and I can't believe he's still in post. Any prime minister with any self-respect or will to actually support education would have sacked him by now. Anyone with any self-respect themselves would have resigned by now, because he's clearly unfit for the post. And we've been saying that for 6, 7, 8 months. We've been saying it since April last year, haven't we, realistically? And yet he's still here. I think it's all very well and good Labour coming out and saying now he should resign, but there's been weak opposition as well, I'm afraid. It's got to be said. They haven't been calling it out loudly enough or clearly enough or soon enough for my liking. It's coming out in the last week or so and saying, you know, he needs to resign is 9 months too late. Gavin Williamson this week has come out and said that live learning is the best thing they can do in terms of lockdown for schools. Goes against the Ofsted advice, so he's not read. It's just what he thinks, and he doesn't have a clue. Live learning may well be the best for some schools. It may not be the best for some schools. He doesn't know what's going on in his own back garden, let alone every school in the country, and how they're dealing with device shortages, what families at home are dealing with in terms of parents working, internet connection, one device between 3 kids. So he just needs to learn to keep his mouth shut, to be honest.
The problem is, though, right? I mean, we want an education secretary that is vocal and that is going to stand up for education and actually make the right decisions. I mean, it says a lot when educators are asking the education secretary to like actually be quiet, because ultimately we want someone to stand up for the profession, right? I mean, like what's the answer? Do we need to get the politicians to say separate education from politics, like a complete separate entity, and be given like a 10-year budget in terms of what to do with education, and say, look, here's the education sector, go move education forward? I mean, is that the right step?
I think personally, yes. Well, I think I've already said that. Really, it's definitely the way forward. How it will happen is not going to be easy if it does ever happen. It's not going to be a revolution. It's going to have to be an evolution towards it, isn't it, really? It's not going to just change, you know, like that overnight. I think it's interesting that he's the first education secretary to unite the whole profession against him. And that's unions, and that's all different political beliefs of educators and schools, colleges, nurseries. Everyone is in full agreement that he's a hindrance. He's not a help. He's making it harder for educators. And if ever there's a time when we don't need anything to make it harder, it's now. But I mean, he's gone out of his way to make it more difficult. He's openly confrontational at times. But yeah, I think we definitely need to move away from a system that we have now. There's aspects of it that are good. I mean, I think you'll find the schools and educators across the country in general are excellent. That they've changed the whole approach to teaching and learning in the past 10 months. There's not many professions that can change the whole approach at the scale that educational establishments have done, as well as they have. Despite Gavin Williamson. Yeah.
I mean, it's phenomenal, isn't it? Like, educators have been phenomenal over the last 10 months, and we have to give credit to schools, teachers, support
Absolutely.
for everything they've done. You're talking about over 33,000 schools in the UK, and on top of that, like the millions of children's lives that we're talking about. And so that's what frustrates me, is because it's all good. Like those kids that are academically very smart, or they are very good at memorizing information, or really good at exams, or go to private schools. I mean, they're all right. I mean, they're always going to be all right, you know. But it's what about the kids that kind of get forgotten about and left behind? And that's what if we're ever going to bridge this gap between the disadvantage and advantage, that is where we really need to be focusing on, trying to actually enhance those children's abilities in some respects, aren't we? I mean, do you think we're failing those children in the current education system?
I think we know we're failing these children in the current education system. We know there's a disadvantage gap. We know there's an attainment gap. We know they're getting larger. We know that it's going to be made even worse by COVID and the lack of provision of devices, for example. And we know that the current system is not fit for purpose. There's a focus on test results. So children getting high scores in their English and maths, to give you a very, very basic example, whether it's at SATs or GCSE. Every child has a skill or strengths, and I think the problem is not so much that they might not make the grades that the top level might get in English and maths, but actually they're not given the opportunity to go for their strengths in other areas. The curriculum is too narrow, and we're too restricted at primary, secondary and beyond, really. And we are subject to testing. So this year being no SATs makes no difference to me, makes no difference to the kids, makes a difference to the secondary schools. It actually gives us a bit more of an opportunity once we are back, hopefully March, April, whatever it is, that we actually, can give the children that variety of opportunities and learning experiences that aren't constrained within a narrow curriculum that's focused on getting decent SATs results.
Yeah, I mean, it's yeah, and that's the problem in some respects. We're so exam centered, aren't we? I mean, like it's almost like education is the destination and not actually a part of the journey. And I sometimes feel like we kind of kill the creativity and innovation and individuality in children in terms of putting them as a system through the process. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I know you're doing some great stuff at your primary school, and there are schools that are starting to follow suit in terms of like not focusing as much on the curriculum, but actually about like development of the students. I mean, like, how can we embed that into the curriculum so it's actually nationwide and not just a school at a time,
I think there's a few things within that, isn't there, really? I mean, Ofsted got to be mentioned. The new Ofsted framework, I've never had a bad experience with Ofsted, to be fair. I know there's a lot of schools have some shocking inspectors. The new Ofsted framework is very, very focused on children thriving in education, in primary education, the primary inspection framework. It's less focused on the data. I think that's a hugely positive step, because actually once schools get to know that, schools will focus less and less on the data, and they can actually focus more on providing enriched curriculum across all areas, all subjects, and other opportunities for all children. So I think that's a big thing, and that's going to take a couple of years. Ofsted need to work with the profession as opposed to being seen as a stick to beat them with. I think unfortunately during the pandemic, Gavin Williamson himself has threatened schools with Ofsted, been inspected for not providing sufficient remote learning, or not high enough quality remote learning. I'm not sure Ofsted have the actual expertise to comment on what's going on in schools in that respect. Ofsted needs to change its approach, in my view. We need to be working with Ofsted and seeing the inspector that we get allocated once a term, working with maybe a cluster head and a local authority representative, and they come every term, every half term, end of 3 years. You actually have a formal inspection there, but it's a constructive, supportive inspection, and it gives a much greater picture, much more accurate picture of what the school's strengths are and areas for development. Ofsted is a big thing for changing the testing regime alongside that. SATs, you are held to account by SATs. The only reason we have SATs is it's another stick for the Department of Education to actually beat schools with. I suppose my biggest point in that would be that actually, in terms of the pandemic, how have our reading, writing and math skills helped us get through the pandemic? And the answer is they've been nowhere near as important as resilience, looking out for each other, taking care of each other, and other strengths that all children have and that all schools promote on a regular basis.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think that, like, even as an employer, what I look for is grit, resilience, people that are courageous, innovative, that are going to challenge ideas. And I think a lot of employers feel that way. I mean, I was speaking to a lady called Rianne Morelli, and she's a solicitor that works with CEOs and decision makers in firms and recruiters. And like, she was explaining that those kids that leave school, that go on apprenticeships with them, it takes them 4 years to get to bridge the gap between the school and the workplace, because they're not emotionally ready, and it's so sad to think that school, like, I mean, school should be a platform for children to really get prepared for the real world. And right now, what we're seeing is actually the gap is getting bigger. Like it's more difficult for children to actually say the right things or know the right things to do in an interview, let alone, like, I mean, I have had somebody leave school and come for an interview, really smart lad, and he literally came to the interview and didn't know what we did as recruiters. I mean, he didn't even research the company before he came there. He thought we were internal recruiters. And I was like, come on, like, where are these, like, sort of preparations for the real world? And I think, like, those interpersonal skills, like that being confident. I mean, those are things that we need in the real world, but it's not things that we're assessing in schools. And actually, we're letting those children down in some respects, explaining to them that exams are the be all and end all of like success, which in let's be honest, they're not anymore, So, I mean,
I'd agree with all that. I think I can't really comment on secondary too much because I'm a primary head teacher, really. So I would imagine most secondaries have a careers service or a careers advisor at some point. But I mean, I'd go back to the budget pressures. Secondaries have had their budget slashed as well. So providing a decent career service and for all those children that they have, thousands of them, is becoming increasingly difficult. I can't really comment much on what happens in secondary.
Yeah, no, cool.
I'm conscious there's a local secondary here opened a studio school, and that studio school offers environmental management and engineering and things like that. And I thought that was a fantastically positive move to make.
Yeah.
And it's almost providing with an apprenticeship. And I know a lot of the children doing environmental management and land management are actually going into jobs, walking into jobs as an apprentice now. So I think that's a fantastic move.
Yeah.
But again, it comes back to the fact that that school was able to provide that because they actually got funding to launch that studio school, and that funding isn't available to everyone. So until that funding is available to everyone, and it's not going to change things as a whole, is it?
Yeah. I mean, let's talk about it from a primary school perspective then. I mean, what can we do to, like, for those younger children to make sure that they are more emotionally intelligent by the time they get to secondary school? I mean, what can we do as a nation within the primary school, like, part of education?
The curriculum as it stands, I don't mind the curriculum as it stands. It does give schools scope to actually innovate and provide some fantastic learning opportunities, character development opportunities for children. But it is still a very, very full curriculum. It is very hard to fit extra things in and tick all those curriculum boxes, which Ofsted will still inspect. So whereas I do say they are looking for the thriving children and things, the fact that they're coming in and doing deep dives in subjects puts a lot of pressure on schools, and it means a lot of schools are, probably for very good reasons, if they've not got a decent Ofsted behind them last time, are quite wary of straying too far away from the constraints of making sure that every single curriculum box is ticked. You'll find some fantastic practice in primary schools, play-based learning and things, going up from early years through Key Stage 1 into Key Stage 2. You'll find the same for using education technology, but you'll find that in less schools than we need to see, because people are too scared of that formal inspection and too wary of making sure every single area of that curriculum is taught. What's our curriculum? About 400 pages long. If you look at the primary and secondary curriculum, it's ridiculous. It's far too large. It's far too big. And yes, you do have that freedom, but unless you go to a 10 or 12-hour school day, you haven't got the time to teach all the extra things and tick all the boxes that you need to teach.
Yeah, I mean, but like, because like from my understanding, the way it works is every time an education secretary's come into place, they realise that there's something that's important, that they feel is important. They add it on, and every time a new education secretary comes on, I mean, the bulk of the curriculum just seems to get bigger and bigger. I mean, like, what do you think the real focus should be on in terms of the curriculum, and then what should you have flexibility to kind of innovate and work around?
From a primary perspective, I mean, there's obviously got to be core skills taught. I mean, I'm fully behind that. High expectations are set in my school and most schools, and whether it's reading, writing, math, science, we set high expectations. Children have to have that basic learning. I don't always agree with how it has to be approached because of the curriculum, but they must get those basic set of core skills. I think we're about to see 2, 3, 4 years of huge issues, if not longer, in families, primary schools, secondary schools, following the end of COVID. When we actually get back to some form of normality, we're going to see huge mental health problems. I'd like to see a much greater focus in schools, all ages, from nursery upwards, on actually developing children's resilience, independence, creativity, and being given the freedom to do that, because I think those skills are more important than some of the things that we have to be taught in the curriculum. Technology and the using of education technology. Now, we're a Google reference school. We use it all the time. We only use it if it enhances the learning. It doesn't replace teachers. We only use it if it enhances the learning. But you look at the World Economic Forum reports on digital skills gaps and things like that. We should be teaching these digital skills from a very early age. And actually, the kids from nursery upwards are very competent at using devices because they grow up with them now. So, get them on Chromebooks, get them on iPads, and certainly I accept that their literacy skills might not be at the stage until maybe year 1. They can actually sign into a computer and do things, but get them used to using these devices, but only do it if it's beneficial to learning. Don't do it just because you want to be an ed tech school or something like that. And I think something that rarely gets mentioned nowadays is that alongside all those things, teaching and learning, the importance of that, high expectation is, from a primary perspective, children are supposed to enjoy school. You're supposed to remember primary school and enjoy it. It's where you make friends. It's where you get your character developed and where you become who you are. And that's where it starts. And actually, seeing year 6 kids stressing about SATs is not what I want to see. I want to see children leaving school and remembering it for the good things. Not for the spelling and grammar idiocy that people like Michael Gove have introduced in the past. You're supposed to enjoy it. The more you enjoy it, the more you're going to learn.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a massive thing, isn't it? I mean, like there were statistics to show that those kids that were getting a free school meal were 32% less likely to learn than when they did have like a warm meal in their belly, like with free school meals. And what I'm trying to get at is the overall happiness of a child contributes to actually how much they learn and how much they can absorb because they don't have those mental blocks. I mean, you talk about mental health, and it's such an important topic because mental health, we're talking about billions and billions of pound spent on mental health in the UK every single year. Now, we've got such a reactive approach. I mean, what we're trying to do is spend money to try to fix the people like with mental health now. But actually, what we can do is invest money into the primary schools so that kids are emotionally more intelligent. And that, like,
absolutely, yeah.
I mean, why is that not happening? I mean, it's so important. Like, we need to be bringing in emotional into schools.
You have to go back to the politicians, don't you? And our current government and Mr. Johnson, Boris, and Gavlar and whatnot, they're all saying how important schools are. And quite frankly, they're talking out their arses because until they actually put their money where their mouth is properly, they do not place sufficient importance on schools. It's a political tool for them, I'm afraid. And it's the same with the mental health, as you just referred to then. You've got some good politicians like Robert Halfon talking about the need for mental health practitioners in every school.
Yeah.
You can see it coming a mile off that Boris or Hancock or Gavlar or whatever he's called are going to come out and they're going to announce £1 billion for mental health in schools. When you look at the fine print for that, £1 billion is peanuts in the grand scheme of things. Because once it's spread across 34,000 schools, and probably the 2 or 3 years that they actually spread it over, it's going to be providing a bit of training for somebody in a school, unless you're a large secondary school where you might actually get a professional. If you spent several billion now, it would be a huge figure, but it would save tens of billions in the long run. If you're creating children or supporting children in developing to become a lot more resilient learners, which means less mental health problems in later life. And there's a raft of studies and evidence out there to support that. So why they aren't doing that is beyond me. But it's the same with the catch-up funding and the laptops, they come out with these big figures for PR purposes. They know damn well they are insufficient figures, and they know very well that they are going to cost governments in the future tens of billions more by not doing it properly now. So we can only put it down to a political choice.
Yeah, I mean, it's mental, isn't it? Because like from your perspective as a head teacher of a primary school, I mean, like obviously you get given a budget every year, but like, is there no way that you can allocate funding to like getting an emotional intelligence coaching?
If I finish the school year in the black, I'm very, very happy. If I've got 50 quid over this year, I'll be ecstatic. Having said that, we have over the years found money for counselling as and when we need it. But whether it's an educational psychologist or a consultant paediatrician or speech and language therapist, occupational therapist, we can certainly always apply to the LA for support there or make a referral. We're quite honest with parents and say it could be 6 months, it could be 3 years before we actually get that referral and an appointment for your child. We can buy in expertise, but there's less and less expertise out there in the private sector. So yeah, getting that budget balance black red right is a tricky balance, and sometimes you have to go into the red because you need to get a child some counselling. At the school here, we've certainly seen an increase in need for counselling over the past few years, compared to when I started 10 years ago. Just the concept of employing somebody full time, or even 2 days a week, is well beyond my budget.
Yeah. I get that. I mean, look, I think the big problem is we've always had like these counsellors and maybe speech therapists is different, but we've had these counsellors in, right? And actually counsellors, all they do is actually listen to the child, but actually it's the emotional intelligence coaches that will listen and give them the floor, but then like coach them on how to think and how to like overcome those objections. I think the world has changed in some respects because listen, there's people that sit in counselling for 3 to 5 years, and it doesn't make any difference. I mean, actually sometimes what people need is action and how to actually like move forward. And if you can develop those children at a younger age, like with the right emotional intelligence coaching on how to see the perspective of a difficult situation, I mean, that is what kind of sometimes kids need on how to deal with emotions, not just to be heard,
Yeah, absolutely. There's always going to be some additional professional help needed by various individuals, whether it's counselling or any form of support, but there's definitely scope to change the primary curriculum to include character development and, build children up, help them develop the resilience, independence, like we've already mentioned, so that there's less need for that in later years. I think, personally speaking, for the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to need both. We should be changing the curriculum, changing our approaches, and we should have a provision, funded provision, for everything that's needed for every single child in the country. It's not going to happen with the current government now.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a shame. It frustrates me because all I'd really like to see as a starting point is education separated from politics, because I think that's like that's where it really needs to begin. If we're going to evolve education and actually get the specialists doing what they do best and actually thinking about what is going to be beneficial to make learning inclusive for all children, not just the ones that are academic or the ones that are really good at memorizing information, but inclusive for all children. I mean, we're going to see like the growth of this economy in far different ways in the next 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're never going to get completely apolitical education system, but getting that cross-party agreement and giving actual on-the-ground educators a greater voice is a huge part of it. Gavin saying he consults his educators. When you look at the list, I think we mentioned this in previous conversations, there's no serving head on there, really. There's no small school primary heads. There's no serving secondary heads. They're all either ex-professionals or CEOs and things like that. That is not a fair representation of the education sector. There's no FE, there's no nursery. It's not good enough. That needs to change. You need a greater voice in there, but it's never going to be completely free of political interference.
But why can't it be? I mean, if the whole education sector got together, because ultimately, look, listen, I get it. Like, not every educator agrees with each other, right? I mean, there are different views and different sides of the spectrum in terms of views. But surely getting the education sector together, regardless of if they completely agree with each other or not, surely the decisions that will be made will be far better than the current decisions that have been made by the government. I mean, why can't we do that? Why can't we unite the profession?
I would agree with that completely. I think the difficulty about uniting the profession is people have very different views and opinions and beliefs, whether it's political or educational. I think you could probably unite the profession under one umbrella, if you like, as long as they all get a different view and those different views are heard. The unions, I think, have all done a good job from their own respective positions in the pandemic. I'm NAHT. I think they've been very good. I think it's noticeable when those unions come together and they've written letters. That's a hell of a voice, and that's been taken notice of. Why they don't do that more often, and you'd have to ask them.
I mean, I'd love to ask them if you ever had any contacts, but ultimately, like, look, it just shows how powerful it is when the profession unites, because they did overrule that decision, you know, and why not in this momentum?
And I think we've sort of said already that the education profession is pretty united at the moment anyway by Gavin's incompetence.
Yeah.
And I think, personally speaking, if you look at national parental voices and things, I think there's a greater support for educators than there is for politicians now. There's always been a greater reliance and trust in educators, but actually in terms of would you rather have the educators or politicians in charge of education? Now, I think the general public, whether it's families with children or families without children, would be in support of educators rather than politicians now.
Yes, I mean, but how do we build on this momentum then? Because what we don't want to happen is that it's 6 months down the line, things start to get better pandemic-wise, and then we just go back to the same education system that we had prior to the pandemic.
I've got a horrible feeling that's exactly what's going to happen, to be honest with you. I know of schools that aren't taking, I mean, it's certainly not an opportunity. You can't describe a pandemic as an opportunity, but I know of schools that aren't implementing educational technology and online learning platforms, which is a fantastic thing for enhancing learning, but they're not implementing that because of budgetary constraints, because of staff pressures, which I fully understand, but also because some of them think, well, actually, it's going to go back to normal quite soon, so why would we bother? I don't know what you can do with that attitude sometimes. I understand it. I don't agree with it. It's not easy to actually speak your mind sometimes, because you are beholden to governors, and governors have political views as well. So it's a tricky situation. Still there's that one voice uniting everybody. I'm not quite sure how it's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's like even governors, though, not being funny, but majority of them don't tend to be actual educators. So sometimes I find it quite remarkable that head teachers have to actually answer to governors that don't actually aren't in education.
Yeah. I've got 2 heads on mine, 2 ex-heads, which is fantastic. So they both have a good understanding. And I've got another good range of governors who have financial backgrounds, and they're all very good at actually using their expertise and just listening to us on the governing board. I know there's some schools that can't get a full governing board, and there's some schools that are run by governors, like you referred to there, who may not actually have any background in education and might even just be there to have the badge of honour. I'm a school governor. What can you do?
I mean, it's crazy. Like, I mean, we kind of keep doing the same thing every year and expect different results. You know, I mean, like, it's got to be this year. We've got to use
if ever there's a time for change, it's got to start now. Yeah. And I'm hoping somebody out there will start something. And certainly speaking to colleagues across the country, head teachers, they're all pretty fed up, and they all agree it's not working. Whether they'll actually use that voice collectively and get behind something that's out there, we'll have to wait and see.
But can't we do that? Can't we get those head teachers all together, and maybe even in a group together, and actually say, look, let's kind of put our foot down, and enough's enough. Whether we get the support or not, let's do what's best for our children. I mean, why can't we?
Yeah, I think head teachers would be a powerful voice. I think we should say educators. We need somebody to get educators together. I know there's a couple of people out there starting ideas for it. But you're talking head teachers, teaching assistants, nursery nurses, all sorts, and that profession together. Parents, parental voice is a big thing.
Yeah,
get them all together under one umbrella, and that is something that could not be ignored, because once you've got that, the unions have got to promote it and get behind it, and at that stage, politicians have got to sit down and listen. My only concern would be that the current set of politicians really don't seem to give a monkeys.
Yeah.
And they just ignore it, don't they, and carry on. And 2 days later, what's the next scandal? I just cannot believe what they get away with, really.
It's bonkers because in some respects, like it's really difficult because I find it such a big problem that we don't actually teach politics in schools in terms of kids leave school. A majority of kids leave school not actually understanding what decisions are involved when voting for the party. You know, I mean, we literally hear a couple of things in the TV and whatever sounds best, that's what we go for. You know, and I mean,
and again, you're talking to a primary head teacher, so obviously we teach them about democracy and things like that, and we teach them fundamental British values as the current government has defined them. But as we teach them about democracy and fundamental British values, you have got the actual government ignoring democracy and fundamental British values. So it's almost, you have got hypocritical government. Children at primary, I think, are a bit too young to understand politics.
Of course, yeah.
Right-wing, left-wing arguments, but yeah, it's certainly an interesting time. Not in a good way.
No, I know, but I mean, we could use this opportunity as the start of something new.
Yeah,
I mean, we after World War II, we started an education system that was very much based on the factory workforce. So we had to equip the current children with the right skills to go on and actually kind of add to the industrial revolution. It was the right people in the right place, So it was very factorized. I mean, we haven't changed it since then. I mean, we're talking about a complete different industry at the moment. I mean, we're talking about a technological age, but we're still working on an industrial revolution. I mean, it has to happen. I mean, the revolution has to happen.
I mean, I'm in full agreement, TJ, with you. I mean, Education Foundation have a Vision 2025, and that's just pretty much what you've said. It's actually, in terms of future job market and future skills, we are not teaching what children need to be taught nowadays. It's a woefully inadequate, not fit for purpose education system that we have in this country at the moment. It needs drastic change, complete evolution across all phases and all sectors. And it needs that one voice of people to get together and actually do it.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not saying that I'm the man to do it, right? But in some respects, I've met so many people over the podcast. But if I could get everyone together like that, I've met on the podcast, not everyone, but if we can get so many head teachers, not just the people I've met, but the people that like people that Phil Shelton knows, people like Victoria Carr and Alison Creel and James Pope, and if we can get everyone together and actually start a movement, I mean, how far is that from the realms of possibility?
I know there's things out there trying to do it now. I think the difficulty is speaking to people and you say, look, have you got a bit of time for this? And actually, at the moment, nobody has got any time for anything. Everyone's absolutely exhausted. But hopefully in the next month or two, we'll see a few things out there, really. Something's got to give, hasn't it?
Yeah, I know. I mean, the thing is, I get everyone's tired. I get everyone's busy, right? But it's going to be like this forever. I mean, if we keep doing the same things, I mean, we're going to keep losing teachers in the industry every year. We're still going to have an education system that's not fit for purpose. Is it worth just digging deep and actually just giving it a go for the next 6 to 12 months to try and make it happen? And I mean, how hard is it going to be to get head teachers to want to make that change? Because it's all good that they want to make it.
It's absolutely worth it. Yeah, completely with you on that. I don't think it's hard to get teachers that want to make that change. I think it's hard to find the time and it's hard to get it coordinated. But it can be done. Once it's out there, it's getting that momentum going and getting the support behind it. That's the difficult thing, I think. Coordinated launch of some sort of strategy using social media is the best way to do it, I think, now. But yeah, it can be done. I think as heads and as school staff, secondaries heads have already got the testing in place already. Primaries have probably got it starting next week. Who knows? What will happen before next Monday? So there's pressures alongside all the remote learning things going on already. Hopefully, come half term, people will adapt and start to find time again. Really.
I mean, my worry is that they'll adapt too much and they'll just go back to doing things how they think they should, they've always done it, and that's what.
I mean, like I say, I can understand why some do because of other pressures, like the Ofsted thing that was referred to. They are held to account by that now. So the ones that would like to abandon the curriculum, being really dramatic and actually do various things that mean they can't teach the whole curriculum, but don't do that because of the threat of an Ofsted inspection. I understand why they're choosing not to do that, and I respect the decisions. It's not an easy thing to do.
It's not. I get it. You're talking about risking like hundreds, if not thousands, of kids' lives in some respects because and taking a gamble, isn't it? But every year we let millions of kids get forgotten about in terms of the way that the current system is. So, I mean, like, do we need a radical change if we're ever going to actually make it incorporate, and it's got to be this year, you know? I mean, it's just so frustrating to watch from the outside thinking, look, everyone's so upset, and everyone's so disappointed with the decisions that have been made, and actually they feel for their kids, but actually what we're going to do about it? Because if we continue to do nothing, then we're just going to be going back to the same system, and we're going to keep trying to like chase our tails to try to actually make a system work. That's never going to work, you know? I mean, if it was going to work by now, you know?
I'm with you. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, sorry, you know what? I'll get frustrated because I mean,
I think everyone does. I mean, everyone I speak to is very frustrated, and you take a step back and you try and take the politics out of it, and you try and take the current situation out of it, and it's something that needs to happen. All these things that you're referring to, we've talked about, need to happen. Actually making it happen is a very different thing with the current pressures that we've got. But yeah, hopefully something will change because not a lot is working at the moment.
Yeah, it's bonkers, you know. I mean, hopefully, I mean, like if we kind of had to like kind of narrow it down, what do you think the first maybe one or two steps should be in trying to actually make that happen?
There's got to be one coordinated voice. That coordinated voice doesn't have to have the final say or opinion about what things must change to. It can be something that provides, a professional arena for different opinions that can all be considered by everybody. Then it's got to be under one umbrella to get everybody together and supportive of it, and that gets educators together and gives educators a greater say in everything. And that's the most important thing to me, is that actually it's the people that are actually educating, that have the background, that have the expertise, and full of brilliant professionals in the education system at all phases, all levels. They need a greater say in what is going on. Yeah. Politicians have to have a say within that. I accept that. It's got to be cross-party, so it's not a political influence. It's an actual evidence-based, factual-based say that these politicians from right, left, centre are actually all having their say as well. You're never going to get it completely apolitical. So I think the first thing is there needs to be some sort of cohesive banner that we can all come under.
Yeah. I mean, in some respects, you almost want the people from different sides of the spectrum, right? I mean, because it's only by challenging each other are you going to actually be able to really like kind of push your limits and actually realise what's important, right? I mean, you need
to think of some examples, really. I mean, More Than a Score, fantastic campaign. I'm fully behind it. There shouldn't be SATs. My question would always be, and More Than a Score have done very amazing stuff last couple of years. What are you going to replace them with? There's got to be some accountability. What's the arguments for there? But then there'll be other heads out there saying, actually, we've got kids that like SATs. They like aiming for that. There can be middle ground here. Yeah, and it's also what that middle ground is, doesn't need to be league tables for schools, because we shouldn't be just measuring how schools perform on numeracy and literacy data. You look at Ofsted again, abolish Ofsted. I don't agree with abolish Ofsted. There's got to be some accountability. I don't think it should be a stick to beat schools, but I think it should be, as I said earlier, it should be actually a partnership with Ofsted. People who work for Ofsted have got a huge knowledge and experience. Get them into schools every half term, working with the local authority or with a head from your cluster group, and actually build a really comprehensive understanding of that school's strengths, areas of development, and over 3 years, get to know that school in real detail. So at the end of 3 years, when you have a formal 2-day inspection, 3-day inspection, it's not the high pressure, high stakes nonsense that we have now, where something could go wrong on a day and does not give an accurate picture of the school. Same as SATs. A kid has a bad day, doesn't mean they are bad at maths or reading. They've got a headache, they have a bad test. That's ridiculous to base their secondary flight path on what they've got in their SATs. It's nonsense.
Absolutely.
So, I understand people saying get rid of them. I understand people saying no, they're good. I don't agree. There's got to be some middle ground, and I think getting that umbrella where everybody has their different opinions, it's how we find that middle ground.
I mean, but
you're never going to please everybody, are you?
I mean, but why can't, I mean, look, but why can't you have like 50% exams, 50% like oral, practical, do you know, presentation, like, you know, just like the basic life skills. I mean, because that's just as important as, I understand there's an importance of knowledge. I'm not saying that it's not important to have knowledge. So, I mean, I think there needs to be accountability, absolutely, but there can be accountability on both sides of the spectrum. I mean, it doesn't need to be just exam focused and that's the be all and end all, you know?
No, I mean, you look at the writing, Key Stage 2 writing, the test went however many years ago now, and we have externally moderated, internally and then externally moderated. It's accurate, it's fair, it's based on a range of work. There's a few things in that people might not agree with, that a child can only get greater depth if they're using subordinating conjunctions or whatever. You know, it's nonsense as adults. I've never known what a subordinated conjunction is.
No,
so actually assessing writing for that respect is, I don't agree with that, but I think, you know, writing moderation internally and externally gives you a very accurate picture of the children, but it's not a high stakes test as well. So there is ways of doing it that the profession as a whole will agree with. But then you might find somebody that would like the old writing test back as well. But you're never going to get complete agreement on anything, are you? So,
I mean, we can try though, right? I mean, I'm sure, listen, like with any relationship in life, right? Whether it be your wife or your kids, your teachers, your employer, I mean, you always have to have a level of compromise in anything you do, in any relationship you have, right? I mean, you're not going to have everything. I mean, if you've got a budget of a 300 grand of a house, you want 4 bedrooms and a swimming pool, but actually in your budget, you can only get 3 bedrooms. I mean, you're going to have to compromise on the swimming pool, aren't you? You know, I mean, you're not going to get everything in life. So ultimately, how do we come to a compromise within education and actually get people from all different sides of the spectrum, actually work on a plan to try to move education forward? So A, it's fit for purpose. B, we bridge the gap between the school and the workplace. And C, we make it inclusive for every child to give every child a chance to succeed, not just the ones that are academically bright. You know, go on.
You need the expertise, you need the profession, you need the coordination and leadership, and you need time, don't you, there?
I mean, the only thing you don't need is politicians.
I mean, I'm sort of with you there, but you're never not going to have the politicians, are you? But there are some. I'm not remotely conservative, but Robert Halfon, I think, speaks a lot of sense. I think he's a good voice for reason, and he's challenging the government. I don't agree with some of his thoughts, but he is open to, you know, that's what a politician should be to me. He has his beliefs, but he is open to hearing other opinions. And the Education Select Committee has got a number of members like that. It's got some who I would say are quite blinkered. So politicians are always going to have to be involved, but depends which ones, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, mate. Yeah, I mean, if we separate education from politics, though, I mean, we're talking about a whole different ball game, right? But
absolutely,
you know,
it's never going to happen.
I mean, why not though? You know, I know it sounds crazy, but why not? I mean, like, look, ultimately they've done the same thing with NHS. They gave them a 10-year budget and they said, go like and sort out NHS. You know, I mean, why can't we do that with education?
I mean, I can't really call on the NHS, but I think giving them a 10-year budget and saying off you go and sort it is probably a bit simplistic in terms of
I've simplified it.
NHS. Yeah, but I know what you're getting at.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think you might find politicians at some point in the future would agree to that if they knew there was a coordinating body that was taking, you know, professional advice and opinions from all walks of life in education and all professionals, and that would include politicians. They are elected. We are a democracy when it comes down to it, but you never know. That might happen one day in the future. I'll be surprised if it happens before I'm 50, but you never know, do you? Got to try.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think really and truly, we've got to try. I mean, whatever happens, if we try and actually, even if we make some progress and we actually make some leaps in terms of moving education the right way, it'll be worth it. You know, I'm not saying we're going to get everything we want, but if we can actually start making the changes to give every child an opportunity to succeed, because that's what it's about. You get into education to make a difference to kids' lives, right? I mean, there's millions of kids every year that aren't getting that. So, well, I mean, what do we keep doing? Keep forgetting about these children every single year, or do we actually make a radical change? And I think we need to do it this year, you know. I mean, is there anything you really want to add before we kind of call it? I
can't think of anything now. I think we've covered most things, haven't we?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately it's about kind of making this change, isn't it? So I mean, I just hope people get behind it, really.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
Amazing. Look, we'll leave it there, Matt. I mean, everyone, thanks for watching. Thanks for coming on, Matt. And if you guys like it, please subscribe. I mean, we're going to make a change to education. We just need the support and the backing, you know. But yeah, really appreciate you coming on, Matt.
No worries. Take care. All right.